Welcome, everyone. Uh, what we're going to be looking at today as part of the virtual summer school will be a session on a tool called Cerebrate. And the idea is that during the entire session, feel free to drop questions in the chat so we can answer them live. So if anything is unclear or if you're wondering about how something works or why it works that way, please don't be shy. We're here to answer those questions as well. Uh, so let's get started. Basically, what we're going to be looking at today is a tool that has been around for a few years now as part of the tooling that we release as open source tools. Cerebrate is a companion tool to MISP and some other tooling that we have. So the idea is that it sits on top of some of your other tools and helps you manage those other tools, and especially helps you manage communities via those other tools. So if we wanted to just go through quickly the different aspects of functionalities that the tool is supposed to make life easier for you in. The main one is going to be that it's a contact library management tool. It's so if you want to run any directory services where you keep information about either organizations, individuals within those organizations, as well as meta information related to those elements, then Cerebrate is there to help you. It also helps you with constituency lookup. So basically, for us as a CSIRT, one of the tricky things is that we want to, for example, figure out who we need to contact, which national CERT, which sectorial CERT that we should get in touch with, or which organization in particular when it comes to, say, a compromised IP address. So we can look up the IP ranges that are under the constituency of an organization, and then we know who to get in touch with. That's one example of something you can do with it. Another thing that becomes tricky, especially if you're coming from a world where you're sharing a lot of information via various MISP communities, is the entire orchestration of how to interconnect those different instances. So we're going to be looking at that a fair bit today, of how that works currently and what you can do to ease the process with Cerebrate. Something else that is tricky with information sharing is sharing groups. So if you've been using MISP for a while, you've noticed that sharing groups can be a little bit tricky when it comes to propagating them and informing other communities of the existence of a sharing group. Generally, in MISP at least, these pieces of information, which are basically allowing users to share with a set of recipients, are shared together with data itself. That means that if no data has been shared to the community with a sharing group attached, others will not know about the sharing group. So this is another tool that acts as a central repository for a community of sharing groups, allowing you to distribute them ahead of any information being shared yet. Something else that we're going to be looking at a little bit is the idea of having a cryptographic key lookup. So think of it like a PGP key server that serves up the keys, but the big difference being that unlike such a key server, the keys are not tied to an individual email address, but they can be tied to an organization. It means that if you're receiving information, or in the case of MIS-to-MIS communication, for example, a protected event from another party, you can use your community Cerebrate instance to look up whether that cryptographic key really belongs to the given organization or not, even if it's just linked to a single email address. So besides that, the tool also allows you to manage some of your local tools and to act as a central point for orchestration, though this one is a less pronounced part of the application. However, we'll still look at some of the things you can do there and why that might be relevant for you. Something else that we're not going to be touching too much on today is the entire idea that you can use Cerebrate to manage your single sign-on solution and to act as an entry point for all the shared services and their access management for your community. So something to mention here as well. So Cerebrate was developed as part of an EU-funded project called CSIRTs. So we're just dropping that in all the slide decks that we have for it. So let's talk a little bit about when this tool would be useful for you. When should you consider using it? And just a moment, I'm really weird view mode. So let's switch to presentation mode. There we go. So basically, one of the key points when Cerebrate will be handy for you is if you are running MISP communities, especially if you're running or are involved in multiple of them, and you would like to have a centralized way to manage all of these aspects that I've already mentioned. Also, for the contact directory part, one of the things that was a focus for us is being able to search and easily integrate the directory service into other tools. So if this is a concern to you, Cerebrate will solve a lot of your issues already. Even if you don't interconnect it with other tools, if you just want to have a centralized repository that your other tools can query, it's a great resource for that. Also, if you want to add additional metadata, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this works, but basically the idea is that even though we have a fixed set of fields that we use to describe elements such as organizations or individuals that belong to organizations, you can easily extend it in the tool with standardized fields that you can then reuse later on. We're going to see some examples of how some communities already do it, and some of the examples are also available in the open source repository. So if you want to mimic how that works and build your own, it's as straightforward as building a JSON file. Also, if another thing that we've struggled with in MISP a little bit was the idea that we wanted to open up the self-management of our communities to trusted third parties. That means, for example, if you have an organization that has some users on your MISP community or your other services, you might want to let them enroll new users as well as deactivate users that have moved on to other jobs, for example. We've done this in MISP via what we call org admins. It's a rather straightforward system, but it doesn't carry over to all the other services. It is still on an instance by instance basis. And there are still some restrictions that we're going to be talking about, especially when we're talking about more interconnected organizations, multiple teams within organizations, and so on. So Cerebrate is meant to solve these issues as well. So if you're running into these sorts of hurdles with MISP with other tools, Cerebrate can help you there. Also, if you're already interfacing with communities that run Cerebrate, so for example, if you're part of the national CSIRT network or one of the other communities that run it, in that case, it might make sense for you to stand up your own Cerebrate instance so that you can pull in the information from the other Cerebrates that you connect to and feed that information to your other tools such as MISP. If you also heavily rely on distribution lists, we've seen this, for example, in groups such as national CSIRT groups, military groups, and so on, then it might make sense to stand up a Cerebrate instance to manage those sharing groups in one place and to roll them out to your different tools so that your users can start using them instead of just ad hoc creating distribution lists. Also, if you want to ease the interconnection between MISP instances, so for example, if you have X number of organizations connecting to you and you want to enable them to interconnect between each other directly via their MISP instances, then you can use Cerebrate to allow for a simple UI or API-based workflow to interconnect those instances without any manual exchanges happening outside of the tools. So, and then as a last point, we generally try to do this with all of our tools. Everything that you can do in the application, you can also do via the API and via automation. So if any of the above seems like something that you would want to automate or you would want to integrate with your other tools, then Cerebrate can be a great central repository for you that you can hook your other tools into. So when would it, so now we've seen when the tool would be useful for you and when you should consider deploying it. Now let's look at some of the things where Cerebrate is not that helpful for you, most likely. So one of those cases is if you're not running a community, if you're only running internal tools and you don't really care about information about other organizations, you just want to focus, for example, on managing a few different feeds that you feed to your tools, and you run a single MISP instance, then Cerebrate is not that useful because MISP will be able to do most of the things by itself without you requiring an additional tool for it. Okay. Was there a question? I just heard something. I'm not sure what it was. Hello?
Can you unmute everyone, Andras?
I am not sure how. Uh, wait, maybe it's in the... What was it? Post tools. No, I'm not sure how besides doing it manually. Anyway, let's carry on. So the other thing is, if you just want to have a tool to manage your MISP instances without anything else, purely just updating, configuring, enrolling, and so on, in that case, look at another tool called MISP Fleet Commander. Next Friday, if I'm not mistaken, my colleague Sami will be presenting it as part of the VSS series. So have a look at that instead. So with this in mind, let's have a look at how the tool actually works. So our initial starting point was that we basically started out with MISP being run for a very small community initially. So when we started out with it in 2012, we had a handful of organizations enrolled, and the sharing was pretty straightforward in that scenario. Also, most of these communities, such as the communities that we were part of, kind of operated in island mode. That means that we were sharing information between each other, but we also didn't expect that information to flow anywhere else, and we did not interface with other communities directly. Now, this has changed enormously over the years. Nowadays, we have a bunch of highly interconnected MISP communities out there with various different sharing rules enforced by each node. With overlap of user bases between different communities. So things have become much more complex. That means that this brought various different issues along with itself. For example, managing the interconnection requests between different communities, between members of communities, and so on, as well as basically managing organizations across different communities. If you're coming from this world, basically, then already you see some hurdles with organizations being differently described or differently annotated by UID across different MISP communities. That in itself already causes some issues with access control, with matching up organizations across the different communities and so on. So this was one of the issues we definitely wanted to solve, have a centralized repository for all our communities of the canonized organization meta information so that we can carry that across from one community to another if you want to enroll an organization in a different community. Same thing with sharing groups. Managing sharing groups via MISP has been really difficult at times, mostly because of something I mentioned before. MISP assumes that when you're creating a sharing group or a distribution list, you're creating it on that community, and it will stay on that community instance until someone shares information with that sharing group, and it gets propagated to the recipient organizations on other communities. So this is somewhere where Cerebrate can help you. You can enroll sharing groups directly in the tool, and we're going to see how that works. You can let your community members pull that information directly into MISP via a synchronization feature. Also, enrolling users and organizations has become a tedious task the more our communities grew. So just to give you an idea, we have one community. If you're part of it, you already know the size of that piece, the MISP private sector community run by Circle. That community has over 5,000 organizations, all with an average of, I think, 3 users per organizations enrolled. That means that simply enrolling new users and organizations became an absolute hurdle and absolute overhead for our colleagues to manage. So we wanted to basically be able to delegate this information and have it run in one single place. Cerebrate can help with that. Another thing, finding the right parties to communicate with can be difficult. So one of the things that we wanted to do with Cerebrate is we wanted to allow organizations to say, these are the type of services we offer. We have a MISP instance, we are part of this chat, this whatever. This is how you can interconnect with us. So these types of information sharing basically about your own organization are absolutely critical when you want to ease the communication and interconnection between organizations. And again, I mean, this is something where Fleet Commander comes in more handy, but managing multiple MISP instances can be an utter pain. So we wanted to make that a bit easier. A little bit of an idea of one of the setups that we have. So this is our internal interconnected MISP instance topology. So here you can see that we basically run multiple MISP instances that have different communities that interconnect with different other communities themselves. That are managed by Cerebrate instances that sit on top of those instances. One of the things that is currently not existing from what we list here, but that we want to do in the future, is to also have a public lookup of information. That means for meta information on an opt-in basis, we want to allow organizations to say, here is how you can announce to the world that this is your canonical UID. These are the public keys that are associated with your organization if anyone wants to verify information coming from you about the source veracity. So for these things, we still have something in the pipeline to have ready for the community. Again, this is what I mentioned before. This is just a quick printout of the size of one of those communities, so that you have an idea of what sort of numbers we're dealing with when it comes to single instance that we run of MISP. So this again goes through some of the issues that we're trying to solve. However, there are some differences and some more in-depth points listed here. For example, something that I didn't really talk about yet, for the contact management part, besides just managing that meta information that is used by MISP and other tools to directly identify an organization and to manage the interconnection with other organizations. Sorry,
Yeah, Andras, can you select right click and just mute the people? Thank you. And
yeah,
if you are not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Yep. So let's go back to where we were. Yeah, so besides just these technical data points such as UUIDs, we also want to share information about the individuals and the organizations in terms of what sort of capabilities they have. For example, imagine that you're part of a community and you have an incident ongoing and you want to find out who you can contact, for example, for support with reverse engineering or with certain specific skills. This is something that we want to be able to announce through a central tool. So one of the things that runs contrary to what you can do with MISP is you can, for example, label individual organizations or individuals within the organizations. So if you know that someone is an expert at a specific topic, you can label them as such, and the community can sort and find those organizations and individuals quickly that they can contact. Other than that, for the constituency information, we also want to be able to quickly find who are the different organizations that are operating in a certain geographic area, who are the ones that are responsible for AS numbers, CIDR blocks, and so on. So we want to be able to capture all of this information in the contact database part. For the other things we've already mentioned here, most of them, the cryptographic part is something we haven't really gone into yet. If you don't know about the feature, MISP has a feature that allows you to cryptographically sign MISP data for protection against modification tampering across a distributed MISP network. The way this works is that that data in MISP gets canonized and signed via PGP. And basically, any modifications that you receive to a signed event can only come from one of the signing authorities of the event. So this can be one or multiple signing keys. That means you can also delegate it to third parties if you choose to do so. So we as Circle could say that we trust these 4 other national CERTs that are redistributing our data to also carry our modifications. But that means that the data will still be protected from tampering from other parties. However, distributing these keys is really difficult. So one of the things we wanted to do is to allow distribution of these keys directly through Cerebrate so that you can check the validity of those keys. Did this modification, this is protected event really coming from who they claim it's coming from? So this is one of the things that we definitely wanted to have available. Something that you also want to do in the future for MISP that might be relevant is the signing of sharing groups. So this is even more critical, being able to check the validity of a distribution. That it is really administered rather than someone pretending to be part of a sharing group is something that is going to be crucial for us in the future. And yeah, this is something that we'll distribute through Cerebrate. I already touched a little bit about the community-centric data modeling part. What this entails is basically the ability to create community-based meta information libraries. That means if you want to specifically describe certain data points that get assigned to organizations or individuals, you can absolutely do that. For example, FIRST has their own library for this. The European CSIRT network has their own library for this that has a list of different data points, such as anything from contact phone numbers to opening hours, whatever you want to describe about the organization. So if you already have something that you want to transition to Cerebrate in place in terms of directory services, you can also model all the fields that you have there directly in Cerebrate as well. So how this works is through a system that we call metafields. That means that we have libraries that each work with key value pairs. That means that you can create these keys that are going to be used by the library of metafield library, as simple as creating basically a JSON document describing each of the various fields that you want to encode. And then these latch onto the relevant objects within Cerebrate so that they act as first-class citizen fields basically on the attached object. So again, there are some examples of existing templates. You can find these also on GitHub. So feel free to rummage through them and get inspiration for what your community might need in terms of meta information. So here's what this actually looks like in practice. So this is directly looking at the Circle organization in the CSIRT network instances community. This is basically the first directories fields. So here we can basically see what sort of fields are assigned to Circle that are outside of the default fields of Cerebrate. So here we have things that are pretty specific to that community, including membership information within FIRST. So these are things that normally are very specific to a community. However, you can also see here that we basically have 3 different meta field libraries enabled, and that means that you can fill out and populate the fields for all 3 at the same time, so that you're compatible with the different lookup systems of the other communities. So what this actually then looks like, here we see basically that we have our individual organizations in an instance, and we can also decide to extract some of those fields that are relevant to us for our community from within those meta fields and elevate them to basically an equivalent level as the primary fields that Cerebrate uses. So here you see, for example, the constituency informations, that means IPv4 addresses, AS number, or address blocks, AS numbers, and so on, have been elevated to top level, and they will show up in the index. You can directly search by them in the organization listing in Cerebrate. So you can really alter how the tool works, unlike with MISP, in terms of what information gets shown to the community for each object. Yeah. The other thing that is new compared to what we did with MISP is how we can actually manage the communities directly in the tool. So if you're already a MISP user, you've seen that we basically introduced the concept of org admins quite a few years ago, basically to relieve stress on our colleagues with enrolling new users. That means that we can assign a trusted member of an organization that will then keep track of their own members, create new user accounts, be able to audit the logs of their own members. So an administrator for that individual organization. The same concept exists in Cerebrate, but we went a step further. One of the requests that we've had, especially in the CSIRT network quite frequently, was that you often have an organization that sits on top of a set of organizations. That means that if you have, for example, a national representative, then that national representative would be responsible for enrolling new organizations and new members to those organizations coming from their own constituency. So for this reason, we now have something called group admins. This is also great in the case that we've already seen and struggled with in MISP, where some organizations tend to have compartmentalization within different teams. So they would create multiple MISP organizations, and that would not have full view of the data of their colleagues from a different team. So this can absolutely be managed via Cerebrate via these group administrators. On top of that, we've also separated out the idea of community and site administrators. That means that community administrators can manage anything that deals with data, with members, metadata relating to any of the organizations and individuals in the instance, from the functionality of the site administrator that manages instance configurations, server settings, and so on. So you can now create administrators that don't act as sysadmins, basically, of the instance, but still manage the entire community itself. Again, and for all of these different scopes that we have here, each of those groups can also manage the knowledge base elements tied to their organizations. So that means if you want to describe anything from skill sets, contact information, or individuals of note within an organization without being users, you can absolutely do that through the system. Something else that was crucial for the CSIRT network, but we've already seen uptake of that in other communities too, is the integration with an SSO system. So we ended up integrating with Keycloak via OIDC, but that means that you most likely can plug any other OIDC tool similar to Keycloak as an alternative there as well. Basically, what this allows you to do is if you have Keycloak configured to give your users access to the different tools that you run as an organization, you can manage that now directly through Cerebrate. So the way we do it is we create metafield templates for the different services that are available. We assign those to individuals or users actually, and we allow the administrators and group administrators to manage access to those different tools. The interesting thing with this is that unlike with Keycloak, where you would not want to give any administrative privileges to outsiders, for example, you can allow self-management to be done by group admins and organization admins. So if you want them to manage, for example, their quota of X number of access accounts to your Jira instance, for example, that you give to your peers, you can absolutely do that through Cerebrate. Also, you can enforce limitations on your members through this. Again, numbers of users that should be able to access certain features. You can also limit what permissions organizations can hand out their members, and these would be then carried over to Cerebrate and through to Keycloak and through Keycloak to other tools that are connected to it. The configuration interface is pretty straightforward. So if you have Cerebrate set up, you have a set of pretty straightforward send dice fields to configure to interconnect to your Keycloak instance, and then you can start putting and interacting with it. Okay. So just a little note on managing your local tools. Cerebrate has a set of connector libraries to other tools. Currently, this set is pretty short, but you can build your own pretty straightforward. There's single PHP files with certain standardized functions that need to be implemented on how to interact with your other tools for enrolling users, for viewing information about organizations, and so on and so forth. So feel free to either build those integrations or let us know about what you need so that we have an idea of which direction to take it in the future. So what local tools can do, so these are basically tools other than Cerebrate itself that are sitting within your organization's premises and are connected to your Cerebrate instance that you manage through Cerebrate. So here are some ideas of what we have available there. The one that we fleshed out in terms of integration is obviously MISP. So for us, that was the most relevant to start with. What we can do through the MISP connector, we can configure all the settings of MISP directly through the configuration interface. We can push and pull information about organizations and sharing groups between Cerebrate and MISP. We're going to see how that works in practice. We can diagnose issues with all our MISP instances in one shot. We're going to see that briefly as well. And we can also manage, so enroll users, disable users, modify user details, and so on directly from one place. We can also build custom actions. So this is something that we're not going to go into during this session. But we also allow you to create ad hoc functionalities that an administrator in Cerebrate can call to run certain tasks in the other tools. So again, this should make not only the management of those tools simpler, but also the interconnection of tools with your peers. That means that if you want to announce that you have certain services running in your organization, you can set them into an exposed state in Cerebrate. What this means is that other Cerebrates that connect to yours, so that are synchronizing with yours, will see what other services you have exposed and can request interconnection with those instances. So that means that if I run 3 different MISP instances, one specifically for sharing raw data captured by our mail to MISP, for example, and one that is specifically capturing information from a sandbox and the sharing community that we run, I can choose to expose, say, the mail to MISP and the community one to our Cerebrate community, and say that if anyone is interested in this and is part of our wider interconnected Cerebrate network, they can send us a request to interconnect, and then we can decide whether we allow the interconnection or not. If another party wants to initiate such a connection, they simply select our tool from their Cerebrate instance. They say, I want to interconnect with this local instance of, say, MISP or whatever tool we're running with that specific tool. And then Cerebrate will start the negotiation process. We have a 3-way handshake where both parties need to agree to the interconnection. And if both do, the connection is established by those interconnector libraries directly. So you don't have to take care about of enrolling sync users, exchanging API keys, and so on. These are then handled by Cerebrate automatically. So here's just a small example of what this would actually look like. So here we're looking at a small Cerebrate instance I had running a while ago, where I had two Wisp instances exposed. So if anyone was interconnecting with my Cerebrate instance, they would be able to click that little connection icon on the right and say, we want to interconnect with this instance. And then the whole process would start that I mentioned before. So this is basically what the diagnostic of my local, what we call brutes, so that's basically my organization's interconnected local tools, would look like. Here we see that in my brute here, I basically have my Cerebrate running, and I have two MISP instances running. So the MISP connector is showing two connections internally. Now, one of them seems to be down at the time when I took the screenshot. So the health basically says this is not accessible. The other basically tells us that it's healthy, but it has some issues. In this case, it has some misconfigurations that might give me performance issues. Or for example, if one of the instances would be outdated, that would be shown as well. We see that with the interconnected Cerebrate instances there, it shows that some of those instances at the time were outdated. So that gives us a moment to get in touch with our partners to tell them to update their instances. So what this actually looks like in practice, here we connect to one of our MISP instances, and we can browse the different organizations that exist on that instance. We can browse the diagnostics, settings, and so on. And we can also synchronize that information. So we can select the organizations that we're interested in, or we can just say get all the organizations and ingest them into our Cerebrate, and then we can push it further to other MISP instances or other tools. So this is basically what the tool does so far. Here are some things that we want to do in the future, so you have an idea of which direction we want to go. One of the biggest hurdles that we're facing currently is that we don't have access to taxonomies and galaxies directly in Cerebrate. So we want to open these features up in the future as well and be able to describe classification libraries and so on, similarly to what we do in MISP, also for managing aspects such as skill sets, constituency, and so on, that I mentioned before. So this will also mean the creation of new taxonomies once we get to that point. For the data signing and validation part, we still have a long way to go. Currently, we do share the public keys through Cerebrate already, but we do not rely on it automatically via MISP. So you still need to cross-check manually if you want to check whether this key really belongs to someone. So one of the things we want to open up, and this is development on MISP side, is going to be automatically checking the keys against your configured Cerebrate instances, whether it's known or not, and to show that information directly with a protected event and to validate the information directly, whether it's really coming from the source that it claims to be coming from. We also want to build more connectors in the future to other tools, especially what's in our site is ticketing systems such as FlowIntel, integration with mailing lists. So we currently have a mailing list configuration tool in Cerebrate that allows you to create a mailing list out of your contact database, but we want to directly be able to push this information to other tools so that the mailing list automatically gets created without us having to export it and import it in other tools like we do currently. Other than that, messaging apps are also high on the list of tools that we want to directly interconnect and be able to initiate chat sessions directly from Cerebrate, so that you choose the participants from the knowledge base and then spin up a room in your favorite chat application that you can connect to. If you're interested in the tool itself, everything is available on GitHub. So you see the links there. There's also a website that describes further how the tool works, along with some workflows and so on, as well as a link to the MISP project website. So that's enough talk about the tool without actually having seen it. So let's quickly have a look at what the tool looks like, how it functions, and then we can wrap up the session with the Q&A part. So I'm going to just log back into my Cerebrate instance. So this is basically once you log into the instance. So if you have Cerebrate installed or if you're connected to one, what you're going to be seeing when you log in, you see some metrics about the information that is hosted on the instance. This is my local dev instance, so you're going to see a lot of junk here, and also some weird organization names and so on. I apologize for that in advance. But basically, the main things that we're going to be looking at are basically our contact database, our trust circles here. So that's basically our distribution lists, as well as some of the administrative functionalities. So when we look at what the individual list looks like, these are all describing a person. So each entry that we see here is a person. It's not necessarily a user, so it's different from MISP. We differentiate between actual users of Cerebrate and individuals that we just have information about. So that means that you can display meta information about colleagues that you don't enroll in the system, for example, or you can receive information about individuals of an organization without them all being enrolled in the system directly, unlike in MISP. You can see here that that we basically can have relationships to different organizations for each of the individuals. So by default, and again, this is a lot of test data that I've been working with before, and they don't have that assigned here. But automatically, when you create a user, an individual will get assigned to an organization. But you can also decide to flag a relationship between an organization and the individual ad hoc. So I could come into, say, the individual object of my colleague and say that that he's assigned to an organization. I have to do it through this, which is, so I could say circle. Oops. Yep. And then I would have the individual now assigned to a circle organization without them having a user account on the instance. The other thing that is interesting is you can also start labeling users. Again, I don't have anything enabled on this instance, but you could have skill sets and so on described as stacks here that you could then use for filtering later on. So if I wanted to find anyone that has reverse engineering as one of their skills, I could create a tag for it, and then I could search by tag for everyone that has that skill in my community. Organizations work very similarly. The meta information or the default information encapsulated in an organization object matches that of MISP. So you will see here the sector, country, type fields are exactly the same as MISP. This is to make the integration between the two tools easier, but you can obviously extend this with other meta information. So maybe I can go over to a live instance for that. And then we can view some actually populated fields here. So this is coming from the MISP project Cerebrate instance. We're currently looking at the circle object here. We see that it has a set of members that are assigned to it, and we have meta information coming from different libraries. So here we see, for example, from information coming from the ANISA CSIRT network about the circle. We see that in Trusted Introducer, we are accredited in the network. We remember our constituency is national, and so on and so forth. So these are the types of information that we can additionally fill out about the organization. And these would obviously get also then synchronized with other Cerebrate instances when we exchange organization information. Now, besides that, each of the organizations will also have a set of encryption keys assigned. Here we don't have any currently created, but the interesting thing with this is we could add additional encryption keys to the organization that belong to the individual members of the organization. So no matter who you're getting assigned a message from our team, you would be able to validate it against Cerebrate's list. For sharing groups, it's very similar to how MISP works. You can create sharing groups with lists of organizations that are in the distribution list, and you can also add administration or extension rights to individual members of the sharing group so that they can enroll additional organizations within the sharing group. So that's basically it for the knowledge base part. Now let's have a quick look at how the actual broods work and how we can see interconnections with other instances. So now I'm back to my local dev instance, and what we're going to be looking at is the Cerebrate instance that we've just seen, so the MISP project one, what that looks like from a perspective of synchronization. So here I'm looking at the list of organizations that are known by the other Cerebrate instance. I can see the list of individuals as well as sharing groups. And I can also decide to pull in any of these organizations. And not only can I pull them in, I can also see whether my current iteration of that same organization is different, needs updates from the remote, and so on. This becomes interesting when you have a trusted upstream source for an organization library, for example. You can always just say, pull all this information in from that other source regularly and keep my local database up to date with trusted instance. Now, besides that, we also have our local tools. So this is the tool set that is connected to our Cerebrate locally and that we can use to interconnect to other tools. So here we see that we have the MISP projector, the MISP connector currently interconnected to a set of MISP instances. And we can directly say, I want to look at my MISP dev instance and list the organizations that exist on it, list the sharing groups, and so on and so forth. And obviously now the demo effect kicks in and the organization is just not loading. But basically, that's how it would work if my MISP instance was working as expected. Yeah. Or is it my server that is down? Yeah. Network response was not okay. So something is down by local connection. Yeah. You also get an overview of all of the tools that are interconnected. Hopefully my connection works correctly now. Seems like that is down. So it would basically be this view that would allow me to directly pivot from here to other Cerebrate instances or other interconnected local tool instances, similarly to what we've seen before. Now it's loaded. So here we see that I have, again, my local MISP instances connected. One of them is super outdated and absolutely misconfigured. So it has way too little memory to be actually usable assigned to it. So I could directly go from here and either modify some of the settings, update the MISP instance directly from here, or just use it to pivot over to the other tool directly and modify it on the other tool directly. So that's pretty much it for this part. Something we haven't really talked about are organization groups. So actually, we've talked about it, but we haven't seen it. This is another function. This is the functionality that allows you to give access to the management of multiple organizations to individuals that are responsible for them. The way it works is you simply assign a set of organizations to it, and you assign administrators that are entrusted to manage those organizations. And then those administrators can start enrolling new users for any of the organizations or manage the meta information and so on and so forth. A requirement for that, obviously, is that the users that you want to add as group administrators have to have the group administration privileges configured already via the role matrix that Cerebrate has, similarly to MISP. Now, everything that we've done is also accessible via the API. So we have an open API spec that allows you to build your integrations with the tool. Similarly to MISP, any endpoint that you're looking at allows you to get a JSON representation directly of the data by appending .json at the end of the URL. So if you're coming from MISP world, it works very similarly to how it works over there. Now, very quickly, when it comes to managing your own JSON structures, just to show this quickly, we basically have a set of these templates that are coming from the default repository that are enabled. They tell us which of the objects they'll enhance with additional fields. So, for example, what we've seen with the ANISA libraries, addition of meta fields to organizations, this is where it is coming from. If you want to see where these are coming from on GitHub, just go on the libraries default and meta fields, and you see what these libraries actually look like. They're really straightforward. So here's a very simple one where we wanted to assign a set of IPs for various services to an organization. So like Exchange, Office 365, and so on and so forth. The idea is that that it's as simple to create one of those meta field libraries as you see here. So it's really straightforward, and you can absolutely customize what sort of data gets stored about individuals, organizations, and so on. The only thing that you have to take care of is in order to keep these meta field templates updated, they're also versioned. So Cerebrate will always try to pull in the latest version from your local files that you have modified. So make sure that you keep incrementing these when you update your own meta field templates. And that is basically it. So we're done with the session itself. If you have any questions, now is a good time. So let's move over to the Q&A part of the session. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or ask in the chat. I haven't checked actually if there was nothing in there. To the chat. Any questions? If there are no questions, indeed, as Alex mentioned in the chat, the video will be available afterwards. So every session that we do during the VSS will be made available. So feel free to share it around afterwards. And thanks all for spending your Friday afternoon here. And don't be shy if you ask questions also outside of the sessions as well. And go to GitHub, drop issues and so on.